Kathamratam tapta jivanam kaviviriditam kalmashapaham sharamana mangalam srimadatatam bhuvi gunanti bhurirajanaha. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. For those of you who are following along in the book, we're on page 88. This is the chapter, The Master and Disciple. And we do not yet have definite dates, but this is in 1882. It's the third visit to Sri Ramakrishna, and sometime probably towards the end of February. And last week we met a young man by the name of Narendra. And we know this Narendra becomes the future Swami Vivekananda. So we start out with Sri Ramakrishna pointing to Narendra. The Master said, "You all see this boy. He behaves that way here. A naughty boy seems very gentle when with his father, but he is quite another person when he plays in the chandni. Narendra and people of his type belong to the class of the ever-free, nitya-siddha." We had before, Sri Ramakrishna spoke about 4 different classes of jivas, of individuals. Those who were bound to the world, baddha jiva. Those who were striving for liberation, mumuksha jiva. Those who were free, mukta jiva. And those who were ever free, nitya jiva. I hope I got that right. And so he spoke of Narendra here as ever free. This nitya jiva or nitya mukta or nitya-siddha is the term that he used very often. This was a class of individuals who are not born in this world because of past karma. Either they're eternally free, which is a difficult concept, of course, or those who had their realization in a previous lifetime, but had some special mission, or came along with the avatar, or had some special desire to help others in the world, and so chose, in a sense, to be born again. And the classic example we have is of the 4 friends who were walking along the road, and there was a high wall, and they heard singing and dancing and laughter, and one by one they climbed to the top, and the first 3 couldn't withstand the temptation to jump over and enjoy the great merriment on the other side. But the 4th one thought to himself, "Let me go back and tell everyone about the great joy on the other side of the wall." So that will be the nitya-siddha. So Sri Ramakrishna sees this young man who was probably around 18 and understands him to belong to that class. And of course he'll give him a higher status as someone who is an Ishwarakoti, someone who comes along with the avatar. And then we know through his vision that Sri Ramakrishna felt that he himself had taken the form of a young child and had gone and awakened this Narendra, who was lost in samadhi, in some subtle realm, the realm of the absolute, he said, as one of the 7 sages, and himself brought him down to the world to join him in his mission. And we also should remember that this is after the first few meetings with Narendra, when Sri Ramakrishna touched him and sent him into a state of samadhi, and addressed him as Nara Rupi Narayana, that God come in human form. Some people take this, that he was the sage Nara, and Narendra, who was very, very proud of his control, self-control in mind. He was a brilliant person in every way, even as a young man, and had tremendous control over his mind. He was a brilliant thinker. He had tremendous willpower, tremendous concentration of mind. So he was convinced that he'll be on his guard next time. Sri Ramakrishna won't be able to play his tricks on him. But they went to the house of Mani Malik, and there, again, Thakur touched him in a very simple way. And he lost all outer consciousness. And Sri Ramakrishna put different questions to Narendra, who he was, why he was born, what his mission in life was, how long he will, all sorts of different questions. And Narendra answered these questions in that transcendent state, whatever that is. And Sri Ramakrishna said that everything agreed with what he had seen in his state of ecstasy, and this was more assurance that Narendra was the one that he thought that he was, and he would be his main disciple to spread his message throughout the world. So he's talking about this Narendra. Now Sri Ramakrishna had a habit of praising Narendra, and Narendra, for all of his self-confidence, he wasn't a proud person, an egotistical person, and he didn't like it when Thakur praised him all of the time. And Thakur was always giving special preference to him. And whenever some nice food would come, he would start feeding Narendra. So he would say, well, what about my friends? Feed them also. So we'll see that every time Sri Ramakrishna starts praising Narendra, he'll find some excuse to leave the room. He gets a little bit embarrassed. So we're starting out here. This pointing to Narendra, the master said, and we know that he's talking to him, and there are other people in the room also. Narendra and people of his type belong to the class of the ever-free. They are never entangled in the world. When they grow a little older, they feel the awakening of inner consciousness and go directly toward God. They come to the world only to teach others. That means we come to the world because we have karma. We have desires from the previous lifetime that haven't been fulfilled. We haven't realized our true nature. And our goal in life is to attain to that state of liberation and freedom and wisdom, enlightenment. Narendra didn't have to do all of that. The ever-free, they have a slight veil of Maya covering them, which they can shake off rather easily. And of course, through the touch of Sri Ramakrishna, that wasn't a big job at all. So they have a different purpose for coming to the world. They never care for anything of the world, so they're born without any attachment to the world. They are never attached to lust and gold. The Vedas speak of the Homa bird. It lives high up in the sky, and there it lays its egg. As soon as the egg is laid, it begins to fall, but it is so high up that it continues to fall for many days. As it falls, it hatches, and the chick falls. As the chick falls, its eyes open. It grows wings. As soon as its eyes open, it realizes that it is falling and will be dashed to pieces on touching the earth. Then it at once shoots up towards the mother bird high in the sky. Now, as I said before, this is a typical thing. At this point, Narendra left the room, because he doesn't like to hear. He knows that Sri Ramakrishna will go on and on and on, praising him as great virtues. He's a young boy. He was so embarrassed sometimes. Sometimes Sri Ramakrishna would compare him to Keshav. Keshav Chandra Sen was world famous. He had lectured throughout the world. He'd been to England. He had met the Queen. He was the head of the Brahmo Samaj. He was such a well-known person, brilliant also, and had so many followers. And Sri Ramakrishna would say this Keshav only had a small fraction of the spiritual power and virtues that this young boy Narendra had. So he would get embarrassed by all of that. So Narendra left the room. Kedar, Pran Krishna M, and many others remained. Master. Now he won't stop. He'll keep talking about him. You see, Narendra excels in singing, playing on instruments, study, and everything. He came from a very well-to-do family. They had all different tutors for him, so he learned to play all different instruments. He was a wonderful singer, and used to sing in the Brahmo Samaj choir. He knew horseback riding, all sorts of things, a very well-rounded type of education, and so brilliant that he could read something and remember it without any effort. So Shrutidhara, they talk about those who just hearing something once. In the second class, they have to read it twice or hear it twice, but he was really brilliant. So what Sri Ramakrishna is saying about him is really true in every possible way, especially with musical skills, but tremendous singing voice. Also, if only we had recordings of his voice, and we forget how Sri Ramakrishna would mesmerize people with his voice. Not just that he was in ecstasy, but aside from that, we'll see that M says that he had the most beautiful singing voice he had ever heard. And this Narendra, who probably had a deeper baritone type voice also, and he knew classical music. And Dhrupad, he was a great fan of Dhrupad. And when he composed Kandana, he did it in this Dhrupad rhythm, so he tried to revive that also. So the master, you see, Narendra excels in singing, playing on instruments, study, and everything. The other day he had a discussion with Kedarnath, who was quite a bit older than him, and was also a long-time devotee and well-versed in everything. He had a discussion with Kedar and tore his arguments to shreds. All laugh. Yeah, Sri Ramakrishna used to like to tell any great Pandit came, he would say, you have a discussion with Narendra, and he would watch the fun, because Narendra could find holes in everyone's argument. To M, is there any book in English on reasoning? So this is Nyaya. Bengal was famous for, especially this Navya Nyaya. There's a new school of neologic, they call it sometimes. And a little curious what brought this idea into Thakur's mind to ask him about it, because we'll find out that he's not terribly interested. So M, yes sir, there is. It is called logic. So any book in English on reason is called logic. So he uses the English word, which Thakur may or may not have ever heard of. Master, tell me what it says. M was a little embarrassed because M was very shy. He said, one part of the book deals with deduction from the general to the particular. For example, all men are mortal, scholars are men, therefore scholars are mortal. Another part deals with the method of reasoning from the particular to the general. For example, this crow is black, that crow is black. The crows we see everywhere are black. Therefore, all crows are black. But there may be a fallacy in the conclusion arrived at in this way. For an inquiry, one may find a white crow in some country. There is another illustration. If there is rain, there is or has been a cloud. Therefore, rain comes from a cloud. Still another example. This man has 32 teeth. That man has 32 teeth. All the men we see have 32 teeth. Therefore, men have 32 teeth. English logic deals with such inductions and deductions. Sri Ramakrishna barely heard these words. While listening, he became absent-minded, so the conversation did not proceed far. This Nyaya is one of the 6 systems of Indian philosophy, Shaddarshan. And it's one of the systems that applies to all of them. We sometimes think that these 6 different systems, you have to choose which one you like. It's not like the schools of Vedanta, you either believe in Advaita or Vishishta Dvaita or Dvaita. The laws of logic have to be followed by all of the schools. And its study is mostly about pramanas. How do we judge if something is true? And what standards do we use? Because if we want to prove the truth of something, we have to have some standard by which to prove that. So there are 3 basic pramanas. Pratyaksha, we see something. Then somebody says, well, how do you know that it happened? I saw it. And then there's anumana. Well, I deduced it. because somebody walked in and they were soaking wet, so I assumed that there was rain outside. Now, all of these, there can be some type of mistake there. And then generally shabda, there are different terms that are used. There's some authoritative person told me that it was true, or the scriptures told me it was true. Vedanta has 6 pramanas, but these are the basic 3. They break down this anumana into a smaller portion. So this is common. The reason is that if something doesn't meet the standards of logic, it can't be true. That means it couldn't have taken place. So it's not just an intellectual type of thing. If we want to show, if we can prove that something is illogical, that means it couldn't have happened. This is the kind of reasoning behind all of that. When the meeting broke up, the devotees sauntered in the temple garden. M went in the direction of the Panchavati. Panchavati was the place where Sri Ramakrishna did a lot of his spiritual practice, and a lot of his ecstasy took place there. It's a very sacred place. It was originally 5 trees that Thakur planted. There was a Panchavati when he first got there, but then it must have died out somehow, and the one they're talking about was planted by Thakur himself. And the biggest one is a big banyan tree. Then after all these years, they all died with the banyan tree. Then I think it was hit by lightning or something. I don't know if they've replanted it or not, but you can still see at least there was a concrete platform there. And during Thakur's time, they used to have picnics there. And these big creepers were there. They could swing on them. The boys would play with that. So Thakur used to like that. Where he would send people, he would say, go and meditate at the Panchavati, because of all the spiritual practices and ecstasies that had taken place there. So M went in the direction of the Panchavati. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. After a while, he returned to the master's room. There in the small north veranda, he witnessed an amazing sight. Sri Ramakrishna was standing still, surrounded by a few devotees, and Narendra was singing. Thakur loved to hear Narendra sing, so we see over and over again in the gospel that he'll ask Narendra, please sing a song. Sometimes he'll mention a particular song, sometimes he'll leave it to Narendra. Most of the songs in the beginning that Narendra knew were from the Brahmo Samaj. But he, as I say, he had a brilliant memory, so he had all of these things committed to memory. M had never heard anyone except the master sing so sweetly. When he looked at Sri Ramakrishna, he was struck with wonder, for the master stood motionless, his eyes transfixed. He seemed not even to breathe. This is the first time that M is seeing Sri Ramakrishna in this exalted state. He was impressed with him before because of his brilliance, because of his tremendous devotion, all of these other reasons, but he hadn't seen this state of ecstasy before. He seemed not even to breathe. A devotee told M that the master was in samadhi. M had never before seen or heard of such a thing. This samadhi, unless someone studied Raja Yoga and was familiar with certain schools of philosophy and everything, this isn't something that they would have known about, and certainly no one would have seen it. There were a few cases we hear about in the gospel of someone going into that state. Sometimes it would be without much preparation, and there's one story about someone who went into that state of samadhi, and his devotees tried so hard to bring his mind down that they practically burned his body, and he eventually died from all of that. But with Sri Ramakrishna, the samadhi is not exactly the samadhi that we read about in Raja Yoga. In Raja Yoga, we have 2 different types of samadhi. It's savikalpa and nirvikalpa. And the distinction is in both cases, the mind becomes perfectly still. But in Savikalpa Samadhi, there's no functioning of the mind, but there's some awareness, some I consciousness. So there's some feeling that, I've entered into this very deep state, something like that. In the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that's gone. So there's only merging. So there's only pure consciousness at that time. Now, the devotional schools talk about something called Bhava Samadhi, and generally, of course, Sri Ramakrishna had all different types. Generally, the Samadhi that we're talking about with Sri Ramakrishna is this Bhava Samadhi. And they'll use both terms, and we'll describe it. The master was in Bhava, a state of ecstasy, or in Samadhi. This Nirvikalpa Samadhi was what Sri Ramakrishna experienced under Totapuri when he did his Vedantic sadhana. And at the very, very beginning, when Totapuri told him to merge his mind in that Brahman, and he put a piece of glass between his eyes and said, fix your mind there. And Thakur said, when the image of the Divine Mother came, I took knowledge as a sword and cut her in half, and she disappeared, and then I merged. He was in that state for 3 days and 3 nights. Totapuri was waiting for him to come out of that state. Then later, after Totapuri left, he was in that state more or less 6 months. His mind would come down just enough of body consciousness through somebody probably hitting him and everything, so that he could swallow a little bit, so he didn't die. He could live for 6 months, and then ultimately 2 things happened, and which is the cause, and if they're related is very hard to say, but he heard the voice of the Divine Mother say, remain in Bhavamukha. And he also said that at that time he had such a terrible dysentery that the pain of that also brought the mind down. So perhaps the second was the instrument through which the Divine Mother managed to bring his mind back down. So he's in this state now of Samadhi. What's going on inside of his mind, the only clue we get is that very often he would tell us afterwards. He would say, oh, you know, the Divine Mother said this, or I saw this in that state. So it's not the type of Samadhi where the mind is not functioning. The mind is functioning, but on a completely different level, and the mind is completely cut off from the senses. So Thakur during that time will have no awareness of his body, no awareness of where he's sitting or standing in the room. That'll all be gone. Mind will be in some higher realm somewhere. From the outside, no one could tell what type of Samadhi it is. Only we know that much, that he had lost all outer consciousness. This is the term that's used very often in the Gospel. So a devotee told him that the master was in Samadhi and had never before seen or heard of such a thing. Silent with wonder, he thought, is it possible for a man to be so oblivious of the outer world and the consciousness of God? How deep his faith and devotion must be to bring about such a state. Now the state used to come, it used to get triggered. There's a term that we find, and Thakur uses it himself often throughout the Gospel, uddipana. Uddipana means something will enkindle this spiritual mood in him. And Thakur used to say that he was like very dry kindling, that if a flame comes anywhere near it, it'll blaze up very quickly. So that was the nature of Thakur's mind, that anything could trigger this spiritual mood. This was a problem for him because one time there was talk of him going to the zoo, and he said, somebody said, well, if you'd seen the lion, immediately you would have thought of Durga and you would have been lost and you wouldn't have seen anything else. So this happened to him very often. And so especially when Narendra sang. Narendra was singing, meditate, O my mind, on the Lord Hari, the stainless one, pure spirit through and through. How peerless is the light that in him shines. How soul-bewitching is his wondrous form. How dear is he to all his devotees. Even more beauteous in fresh blossoming love that shames the splendor of a million moons. Like lightning gleams the glory of his form, raising erect the hair for very joy. The master shuddered when this last line was sung. His hair stood on end, and tears of joy streamed down his cheeks. So when the mind would come down a little bit, he could hear these things. He had these different states: conscious state, semi-conscious state, this unconscious state, where unconscious of the external world. Mind would go back and forth. This is that bhavamukha state. It could go back and forth between these three different states. He could be aware of the world, but see this world as a manifestation of the divine, or he can go into that half semi-conscious state, bhava state, or he could be merged in Brahman. The master shuddered when this last line was sung. His hair stood on end, and tears of joy streamed down his cheeks. Now and then his lips parted in a smile. Was he seeing the peerless beauty of God that shames the splendor of a million moons? Was this the vision of God, the essence of spirit? How much austerity and discipline, how much faith and devotion must be necessary for such a vision? The song went on. Worship his feet in the lotus of your heart, with mind serene and eyes made brilliant with heavenly love. Behold that matchless sight. Again, that bewitching smile, the body motionless as before, the eyes half shut as if beholding a strange inner vision. So the mind comes down enough to hear the song, then goes back up. The song drew to a close. Narendra sang the last lines, caught in the spell of his love's ecstasy. Immerse yourself forevermore, O mind, in him who is pure knowledge and pure bliss. The sight of the samadhi and the divine bliss he had witnessed left an indelible impression on M's mind. He returned home deeply moved. Now and then he could hear within himself the echo of those soul-intoxicating lines. Immerse yourself forevermore, O mind, in him who is pure knowledge and pure bliss. So this is the end of that day, and went home. Just one more thing about this Narendra. His relationship with Sri Ramakrishna was really unique because he disagreed with practically everything that Sri Ramakrishna said. He was, as we know, a member of the Brahmo Samaj. He was highly educated in the Western philosophy and literature. He did not, as a member of the Brahmo Samaj, he did not believe in any type of image worship. They didn't like this idea of the guru. They didn't like this idea of the avatar. And also as a jnani, that the Narendra, he used to laugh at that idea. God dwells equally within all beings. How do you say that God became one person and not another person? So there was so many different things that he disagreed with Sri Ramakrishna that people would wonder sometimes why he even came. And their relationship was such that Sri Ramakrishna didn't mind when he argued with him or objected to things or came up with the counter arguments. Didn't take it as a lack of respect, where others sometimes would wonder, why does he argue so much with Sri Ramakrishna? But Thakur knew that this was his nature, that he wouldn't accept anything unless he really understood it. And Thakur respected that and appreciated that and loved it. In fact, he told him, don't accept a word that I say without testing it. Test me the way the money changer tests his coins. They'll bite into it to make sure that it's real hard metal. So don't accept anything without testing. So they had that type of relationship, and gradually Swamiji came to accept everything that Thakur said. And he said, because I fought with him so hard for 6 long years, that now I know every inch of the way. So it was a very wonderful relationship that they had. Why did he keep coming? Because he said he had never seen such purity, such simplicity, such ecstasy, God realization, and he had never felt such love. They had such a tremendously loving relationship on both sides. We sometimes think that, Thakur is weeping for Narendra. Narendra used to weep to see Thakur also. They had a really unique relationship. We don't find this with any of the other disciples with the exception perhaps of Rakal to a certain extent, but not to this extent, I don't feel. The next day too was a holiday for M. So we can see after the first visit he's coming at every possible opportunity. We know it was a holiday because he had left home at that time. We don't know exactly why. It's February, anyhow. The next day too was a holiday for M. He arrived at Dakshineshwar at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sri Ramakrishna was in his room. Narendra, Bhavanath, and a few other devotees were sitting on a mat spread on the floor. They were all young men of 19 or 20. Seated on the small couch, Sri Ramakrishna was talking with them and smiling. Now, who is Bhavanath? This is a great question. Bhavanath is a mystery. He and Narendra were very good friends. They used to come together, and Sri Ramakrishna encouraged them to come together. Thakur used to have some insight into who was a good companion, spiritual companion for someone else, that either they had the same mental spiritual attitude or they complemented each other. And he always thought, this Bhavanath and Narendra, that they complemented each other. So he was happy when they would come together. He had a very high opinion of Bhavanath. We hear sometimes that he'd include the Bhavanath as one of the 6 Ishvara Kotis and calls him a nitya-siddha. He puts him in the same class as the others. Later it seems that he considered Purna to be the other one. Anyhow, with the Bhavanath, whether he wanted to or not, because it sounds like he didn't want to, but a marriage was arranged for him. And in the beginning, it was a very spiritual marriage. He would refer to his wife as mother and everything. Thakur was very impressed. But gradually, he stopped coming. And for someone who was so close to Sri Ramakrishna in the beginning, it's a little bit of a mystery what exactly happened, because when Thakur was very ill in Kashipur, he didn't come so much. And the other devotees would say, what has happened to Bhavanath? He's been entangled in the world through marriage. That means getting a job and everything else. So a little bit strange, but a very pure type of soul. Sri Ramakrishna praised him very, very much. And he and Narendra were very good friends. Seated on the small couch, Sri Ramakrishna was talking with them and smiling. No sooner had M entered the room than the master laughed aloud and said to the boys, "There, he has come again." They all joined in the laughter and bowed low before him. Remember, in the beginning, he would just fold his hands. And now he understands how to greet someone of Sri Ramakrishna's stature. He bowed low before him and took a seat. Before this, he had saluted the master with folded hands, like one with an English education. But that day, he learned to fall down at his feet in orthodox Hindu fashion. Sri Ramakrishna, even how to make pranam, he would teach the devotees, because sometimes he himself would do it. When Keshav would come, Keshav also in the beginning with folded hands, he would make pranam to Keshav, then Keshav would make pranam to him. Thakur had no pride that way. If he would show the highest respect, Holy Mother also. There's some simple Brahmin priest would come to do puja or something, some small thing, and she would make pranam to him and give him some gift and everything. So they were completely free from pride that way. So before this, he had saluted the master with folded hands, like one with an English education, but that day he learned to fall down at his feet in orthodox Hindu fashion. Presently, the master explained the cause of his laughter to the devotees. He said, "A man once fed a peacock with a pill of opium at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The next day, exactly at that time, the peacock came back. It had felt the intoxication of the drug and returned just in time to have another dose." All laugh. M thought this a very apt illustration. Remember, he always refers to himself in the third person. He's writing this. M thought this a very apt illustration. Even at home, he had been unable to banish the thought of Sri Ramakrishna for a moment. Now, this is not, we shouldn't take this as an exaggeration. if any of us could have met Sri Ramakrishna, then the impression would have been so strong and intense that we wouldn't be able to think of anything else. They all felt that. They all used to say, they're very close, the antaranga, the inner circle, that the second we left, we counted the minutes till we could come back to see him, and thought of him the whole time. That power of attraction was such a tremendous thing. And what was the power of attraction? It was mostly love. The Swamiji makes a very great statement later. He says he tamed us through his love. So that was the thing that really attracted them, along with something which no one could really understand, that how he could commune with the Divine Mother, talk to her, how the mind could enter into a realm that nobody knew. Nobody knew how he did it or where he was or what that experience was like, but they could see this joy, his face beaming, hair standing on end. So these were tremendous, exerted tremendous power of attraction. In the meantime, the master was having great fun with the boys, treating them as if they were his most intimate friends. Now remember, Thakur said that the God-realized soul lives in the world by behaving in a particular way. One of these is balakavat, like a child. And Sri Ramakrishna used to stress, it doesn't simply mean like a small child. It can mean in all different stages of life. That sometimes this God-realized soul, he's like a young man, sometimes like a teenager at different times. So here, he's as if he's a teenager, the same age as the others, and just enjoying the fun with them. And sometimes they would forget also. They would leave and say, I was talking to him and playing with him, treating him like a dear friend. Just as Arjuna says in chapter 11, that, Krishna, please forgive me. I addressed you just as my friend. And we would lie down together and play together. I had no idea who I was sitting with. So they would get that feeling sometimes afterwards. So even at home, M had been unable to banish the thought of Sri Ramakrishna for a moment. His mind was constantly at Dakshineshwar, and he had counted the minutes until he should go again. His mind was constantly at Dakshineshwar throughout his entire life. His whole meditation is everything. He was constantly thinking of those days at Dakshineshwar. And he would always send everyone there to Dakshineshwar. And he said, you also look at everything so carefully that it leaves a deep impression in your mind. So when you sit for meditation, you can feel that you're sitting there. It's a very wonderful technique. So in the meantime, the master was having great fun with the boys, treating them as if they were his most intimate friends. Peals of side-splitting laughter filled the room, as if it were a mart of joy. The whole thing was a revelation to M. He thought, didn't I see him only yesterday intoxicated with God? Wasn't he swimming then in the ocean of divine love, a sight I had never seen before? And today the same person is behaving like an ordinary man. Wasn't it he who scolded me on the first day of my coming here? Didn't he admonish me, saying, and you were a man of knowledge? Wasn't it he who said to me that God with form is as true as God without form? Didn't he tell me that God alone is real and all else illusory, anitya, transitory? Wasn't it he who advised me to live in the world unattached like a maidservant in a rich man's house? So we see with Sri Ramakrishna this tremendous variety of moods that he could be in, and one following another. The very next moment he could go into ecstasy again. Sri Ramakrishna was having great fun with the young devotees. Now and then he glanced at M. He noticed that M sat in silence. The master said to Ramlal, you see, he is a little advanced in years and therefore somewhat serious. Ramlal was Thakur's relative. Nephew, Nephew? Ramlal. Well, he had several nephews and who worked at the temple there as one of the priests. And Ramlal and Hriday, they were the ones who spent the most time with Sri Ramakrishna. And when Swami Sharadananda composed his Leela Prasanga, the great master, he got so much information from the two of them. And this Ramlal, he formed a very close relationship with Swami Brahmananda later. And we find him mixing with the devotees, and he also could sing. So they would very often ask him to sing. He was a good singer. So the master said to Ramlal, "You see, he is a little advanced in years and therefore somewhat serious. He sits quiet when the youngsters are making merry," and was then about 28 years old. And it's true, he had a very serious type of nature, and shy and a little self-conscious. He didn't want to have people see him getting up and singing and dancing and all of that. And Thakur scolded him for that. He said, this is also a fetter. This lojja, or sankocha, this jiguptita, the desire to hide oneself, this little self-consciousness. Lojja grena bhoy tin thakta. He used to say that one should avoid having these things. This lojja, in the sense of modesty, is a good thing. In the sense of embarrassment. Embarrassment means that we're too self-conscious. So lojja grena bhoy, this hatred and fear, these are things that represent fetters for us, bondage. And was then about 28 years old. The conversation drifted to Hanuman, whose picture hung on the wall in the master's room. Hanuman was in one sense the ideal of Sri Ramakrishna, because of the great statement that is attributed to Hanuman, that he looked upon Sri Rama in different ways according to his state of mind. That when he felt identified with the body, then he felt he liked the servant attitude. So Sri Ramakrishna said, if the ego centers there, remain in the world as a servant of God. Then when the mind went a little higher, he felt he was a part of God. And then when he realized himself to be the Atman, then he was in the state of oneness, non-duality. That Rama, you and I are one in that state. So Sri Ramakrishna quotes this very, very often. It's a very beautiful verse. And of course, Hanuman is the image of devotion in the dasya bhava, the attitude of the servant to the master. And when Sri Ramakrishna wanted to realize Rama, he emulated Hanuman. This is the whole theory of this worshipping according to the different bhavas. That we first have to identify with the ideal worshipper and have some experience of that before we can have the experience of the object of worship. So Sri Ramakrishna identified with Hanuman to such an extent that he lived on fruits and he jumped from place to place and really felt himself to be Hanuman in order to have the realization of Rama. And he did it with all of the different spiritual relationships. Sri Ramakrishna said, just imagine Hanuman's state of mind. He didn't care for money, honor, creature comforts, or anything else. He longed only for God. That meant he wanted to see Rama. That Rama was the beginning and the end for him. When he was running away with the heavenly weapon that had been secreted in the crystal pillar, Mandodari began to tempt him with various fruits so that he might come down and drop the weapon. But he couldn't be tricked so easily. In reply to her persuasion, he sang this song. We find a footnote here. The story referred to here is told in the Ramayana. Ravana had received a boon, as a result of which he could be killed only by a particular celestial weapon. This weapon was concealed in a crystal pillar in his palace. One day, Hanuman, in the guise of an ordinary monkey, came to the palace and broke the pillar. As he was running away with the weapon, he was tempted with fruit by Mandodari, Ravana's wife, so that he might give back the weapon. He soon assumed his own form and sang the song given in the text. This is the song. Am I in need of fruit? I have the fruit that makes this life fruitful indeed. Within my heart the tree of Rama grows, bearing salvation for its fruit. Under the wish-fulfilling tree of Rama do I sit at ease, plucking whatever fruit I will. But if you speak of fruit, no beggar I for common fruit. Behold, I go, leaving a bitter fruit for you. As Sri Ramakrishna was singing the song, he went into samadhi. So either hearing a song or singing a song, he could go into that state. Again, the half-closed eyes and motionless body that one sees in his photograph. Just a minute before, the devotees had been making merry in his company. Now all eyes were riveted on him. Thus, for a second time, M saw the Master in samadhi. After a long time, the Master came back to ordinary consciousness. This samadhi, for Sri Ramakrishna, there would be different depths of samadhi. And sometimes his mind would get so merged that it was very hard to bring it back down. This became a tremendous problem when Holy Mother first came to Dakshineshwar to stay with Sri Ramakrishna. In the beginning, they stayed in the same room. There were two cots there, one next to the other. And the whole night, Sri Ramakrishna would go into different states of ecstasy and samadhi and laughing and talking. Holy Mother got no sleep. She didn't know what to do. And other times, Sri Ramakrishna would go into such a deep state that it was very hard for the mind to come back down. And he used to teach his devotees and Holy Mother different methods. And he would tell them that if I go into samadhi because of any particular song or any statement that's made regarding any particular aspect of God, then that's the name to repeat in my ear. So if someone's singing a song of the Divine Mother, then repeat the ma, ma, ma. Somehow that will catch the attention of the mind and bring it back down. So sometimes he would go into very deep states. So there are different levels of this type of bhava samadhi. There was one time when someone was singing songs on Shiva, and he went into such a deep state because Shiva represents the infinite absolute reality. That after a long time, when his mind came back down, he warned them. He said, these are dangerous songs for me. If you sing songs about Shiva, sing something about the Divine Mother afterwards. That'll put my mind at a slightly lower level. So this was the nature of that mind of Sri Ramakrishna, which is just impossible to fathom. After a long time, and the Master came back to ordinary consciousness. His face lighted up with a smile, and his body relaxed. His senses began to function in a normal way. Yeah, when Sri Ramakrishna would go into samadhi, practically the signs of death would come. Sometimes the body would even start to get a little cold. They had trouble knowing if he was even breathing. They would put something under his nose to see if there was any breath. Sometimes they could hardly feel his pulse. There's one case where one of the doctors was present, and he actually put his finger on Thakur's eyeball. It was such a sensitive thing to see if he had any feeling there, and he couldn't feel anything. So this in this state of samadhi, really the breathing almost stops, the heart, everything slows down to a tremendous degree. When Thakur actually left the body, they really had no way of knowing whether he was again in a state of samadhi or if the life breath had left. So for a long time they chanted the name of God in his ear. For a long time they tried different methods, put ghee on his back and rub it down to bring kundalini, all different things, until finally someone said no, that life breath is gone, that this time he's actually passed away. So it was very hard to even see signs of life. So when he would come down, sometimes he would take a deep breath and take a second, and he could see things, and everything would be more or less back to normal. Not our normal, but his normal. So his face lighted up with a smile, his body relaxed, his senses began to function in a normal way. He shed tears of joy as he repeated the holy name of Rama, and wondered whether this very saint was the person who, a few minutes earlier, had been behaving like a child of 5. So in that condition, probably he had a vision of Rama or Hanuman, or saw some divine play. We have no way of knowing. The master said to Narendra and M, I should like to hear you speak and argue in English. Why? Thakur did that. He did it on different occasions. Well, he wanted to hear Narendra and Girish Ghosh argue in English. He knew a few English words, but these were mostly words that were common in the Bengali language at that time. But just for fun, he liked to watch these things. They both laughed, but they continued to talk in their mother tongue. It was impossible for M to argue any more before the master. Though Sri Ramakrishna insisted they did not talk in English. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, all the devotees except Narendra and M took leave of the master. As M was walking in the temple garden, he suddenly came upon the master talking to Narendra on the bank of the goose pond, Hashpukur. Sri Ramakrishna said to Narendra, look here, come a little more often. So he had been coming less than a year probably. Come a little more often, you are a newcomer. On first acquaintance, people visit each other quite often, as is the case with a lover and his sweetheart. Narendra and M laughed. So please come, won't you? Narendra, a member of the Brahmo Samaj, was very particular about his promises. He said with a smile, yes, sir, I shall try. We will stop here for tonight, and we will have the closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukam Bhathurada Vikraham Ishavataram Paramesham Hityam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. Om, we bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.